In the heart of the beautiful Peak District lies the quiet market town of Bakewell. On a warm September afternoon in 1973, this peaceful cemetery became the scene of a brutal and shocking murder that would haunt British justice for decades. 32-year-old legal secretary Wendy Sewell left her office on her usual lunchtime walk and headed into Bakewell Cemetery. Wendy was a kind, lively and independent woman who worked as a legal secretary. No one could have imagined that this ordinary lunchtime stroll would end in unimaginable violence. Working in the cemetery that day was 17-year-old Stephen Downing, a quiet, shy young man with learning difficulties and a reading age of just 11. Stephen found Wendy badly injured. He tried to help her, getting blood on his clothes, then ran to raise the alarm. What happened next shocked the nation. Stephen was arrested, interrogated for hours without a solicitor, and eventually signed a confession he retracted almost immediately. Despite protesting his innocence from the very beginning, he was convicted of Wendy's murder in 1974 and sentenced to life imprisonment. He would spend the next 27 years behind bars for a crime he almost certainly did not commit. This is the story of one of Britain's longest and most disturbing miscarriages of justice, and the determined local journalist who refused to let an innocent man stay forgotten. On the 12th of September, 1973, at around 1:30 in the afternoon, Wendy Sewell entered Bakewell Cemetery through these gates for her usual lunchtime walk. In a shaded area near this spot, she was brutally attacked. She was beaten repeatedly around the head with a pickaxe handle and left for dead. Wendy was found still alive but tragically died 2 days later in hospital. Working as a groundskeeper that day was 17-year-old Stephen Downing. He discovered Wendy badly injured, tried to help her, and got blood on his clothes. He immediately ran to raise the alarm and told police exactly what he had found. Within hours, the police focused their attention on Stephen. The quiet 17-year-old with learning difficulties was taken in for questioning. He was interrogated for over 9 hours, without a solicitor and without his parents being informed. Under intense pressure, Stephen eventually signed a confession written in complex adult language. He later said he didn't fully understand what he was signing. Almost immediately afterwards, he retracted the confession and has maintained his innocence ever since. At trial in 1974 at Nottingham Crown Court, the prosecution relied heavily on that retracted confession and the blood on Stephen's clothing. Despite serious weaknesses in the evidence and no forensic proof linking him to the attack, Stephen was convicted of murder. He was just 18 years old when he was sentenced to life imprisonment, detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. Stephen Downing was sent to prison at just 18 years old. For the next 27 years he maintained his innocence through every parole hearing, every appeal, and every long day behind bars. He refused to admit guilt, even though it would have made his life easier. His family suffered in silence, watching their son grow up in prison for a crime they believed he didn't commit. For years the case seemed hopeless. Then a local journalist stepped in. Don Hale, editor of the Matlock Mercury, became obsessed with Stephen's case. He spent years investigating, re-examining evidence, interviewing witnesses, and exposing serious flaws in the original police work and trial. Don Hale's tireless campaign uncovered new evidence and highlighted how the original confession was unreliable. After decades of fighting, the case finally reached the Court of Appeal in London. On the 17th of January, 2002, after 28 years, the Court of Appeal quashed Stephen Downing's conviction. The judges ruled the original confession was flawed and the trial unsafe. Stephen was finally a free man, one of the longest miscarriages of justice in British legal history. Stephen walked free after spending more than half his life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. But one question still remains unanswered to this day. Who really killed Wendy Sewell? After 27 years and 10 months behind bars, Stephen Downing was finally free. Here he is reunited with his family, the people who stood by him through decades of injustice. On the 17th of January, 2002, after 27 years and 10 months in prison, Stephen Downing finally walked free. The Court of Appeal quashed his conviction, ruling the original trial unsafe and the confession unreliable. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, He was no longer a convicted murderer. He had lost his entire youth and young adulthood. He left prison as a 45-year-old man who had spent more than half his life behind bars for a crime he always insisted he did not commit. Much of the credit for Stephen's eventual freedom belongs to one determined local journalist. Don Hale spent years investigating the case, uncovering new evidence and exposing the flaws in the original police work. His relentless campaign turned a forgotten miscarriage of justice into a national story. Even after Stephen was cleared, one question has continued to haunt the case. Who really killed Wendy Sewell? Some researchers and retired detectives, most notably author and former detective Chris Clark, have argued that Wendy's murder shares striking similarities with the early attacks of the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe. The key points they raise are: Wendy was killed with repeated blunt force trauma to the head using a pickaxe handle, a similar method to Sutcliffe's use of a hammer in many of his attacks. There was a clear sexual element to the assault, consistent with Sutcliffe's pattern. The frenzied, overkill nature of the attack mirrors the extreme violence seen in the Ripper murders. The murder took place in September 1973, 2 years before Sutcliffe's first confirmed murder in October 1975. Some theorists believe Sutcliffe may have been active earlier than officially acknowledged. However, Derbyshire police have repeatedly and firmly rejected any link to Peter Sutcliffe. Their post-2002 reinvestigation examined this theory in detail and found no forensic, witness, or other evidence connecting him to Wendy's murder. The case remains officially unsolved, and to this day no other person has ever been charged. Wendy Sewell's murder has never been solved. Stephen Downing lost 27 years of his life because the system failed him. Don Hale showed what one determined journalist can achieve. But the final truth about what happened in Bakewell Cemetery that September afternoon in 1973 still remains hidden among the gravestones.